Hi, I'm Rochelle Gentile, president of the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra League. I'm here at the Dubuque Golf and Country Club, kicking off our virtual Soundbites series. Under normal circumstances, you'd be right here with me, enjoying a great lunch and a preview of the DSO's upcoming concert, and I'm sure you will be again soon. As you may know, the DSOL develops and administers projects, programs, and events that provide music education opportunities to folks of all ages, as well as financial support to the DSO and its youth ensemble programs. Each year, the League contributes support to youth education events and programs such as the 3rd and 5th grade Arts Trek concerts, the 4th grade Adopt a Musician program, the Youth Concerto competition, the Dubuque Symphony Youth Ensembles, and the Summer String Camp. Along with our many other endeavors is our Senior Classics program, now in its 9th year, providing performances by DSO musicians to entertain residents and their families at local nursing homes and assisted living centers. While the past year has looked a little different, we continue to focus our efforts on fundraising. We encourage and welcome you to join us in our 54th year of supporting the DSO. Please check out the DSO's website for more information about how you can get involved. We hope to see you soon, but before I go, I'd like to introduce our esteemed music director and conductor, Dr. William Intriligator.
Thank you, Rochelle, and welcome everyone. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about Schubert's Fifth Symphony, which will be featured on our Classics 3 programs with the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra. Schubert's Fifth Symphony is a light, joyous, wonderful piece. Just listen to this fantastic opening. Glorious, isn't it? You would say it sounds youthful and fresh and just perfect for springtime, right? You would be right. Actually, Schubert was only 19 years old when he wrote this in 1816. Schubert lived a tragically short life, and it's incredible the amount of music that he wrote in that short life. He died at age 31. This year, 1816, was a little bit of a difficult year for him. He had been hoping for a music position to gain employment, and he didn't get that. So he went back to work with his family, basically teaching kindergarten and composing just on the side. It's hard to imagine somebody being a full-time teacher of essentially kindergarten kids and still having time to write literally hundreds of art songs, 2 symphonies in this year alone, that I'm speaking of 1816, and many other pieces of chamber music and piano pieces. You know, we don't get to perform a lot of Schubert's music on our symphony programs. He wrote some fantastic symphonies, of course, yet we don't get to have concertos. There are some wonderful overtures and, of course, masses and beautiful pieces, incidental pieces from like Rosamunda and many other great works of his. But when one thinks of Schubert, one often thinks of art songs, chamber music like string quartets and the wonderful Quintet in C and others, and piano pieces like the fantastic impromptus and others. So it's special whenever we get to perform Schubert. And this is the first time in many, many years that the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra has performed this Schubert Symphony No. 5. I mean, it might be the first time the symphony has ever performed it. Or, I don't know, I'll have to double check our records, but they don't go back that far, I think. One of the things that's also special about this piece is that Schubert decides to use an unusual sized orchestra for this. In a sense, he's paying homage to Mozart. Mozart was just dead about 25 years when Schubert wrote this piece, but Schubert, being a violinist and violist, and of course being very familiar with Mozart's string quartets and his symphonies, he was just in a real Mozart mode. Just a few months before finishing this symphony, he put an entry into his diary about Mozart, where he said, "Oh, Mozart, thank you for giving us these endless pleasures of your music." In a sense, that was what he was writing in his own journal. And this symphony has an unusual instrumentation, I was saying. It's scored for one flute, not two, which would be normal, two oboes, which is normal, no clarinets, two bassoons, two horns, no trumpets, which would have been normal, no timpani, which would have been normal, and strings. And so it also would have been perhaps normal for Schubert to already include trombones in his symphonies. As you may recall, the first entrance of a trombone in a symphony was with Beethoven's Fifth a number of years before this. And even in Schubert's first symphony, he included trombones. So why did he write for such a small orchestra? This is the exact instrumentation of a piece which I think must have been a favorite of Schubert's, Mozart's G minor Symphony No. 40. I'll remind you of what Mozart's G minor Symphony No. 40 sounds like. Here's a little bit of it. I turned down the sound. You might say, well, if I recall, that's sort of a more tragic sounding Mozart symphony. It's darker than many Mozart pieces, and the Schubert piece that I just played was incredibly bright and full of life and joy. What's the connection? Well, it's an unusual instrumentation that only really exists, well, not only, but some early Mozart symphonies and then this Symphony No. 40. And there are many other connections. Like, for instance, here's the opening of Mozart's Symphony No. 40, the third movement, the Minuet. Let's listen to this. Well, listen to a moment to the opening of the third movement of this Schubert symphony that we'll be performing. Very similar, the exact same key for one thing. Okay, so there's a direct resemblance in a sense there too. What else? Well, there are so many places in this Schubert symphony where he takes a little bit of a cue from Mozart. Perhaps it's ending a phrase with yum ba ba bum bum bum, and then going on to a second theme, which Mozart would do. Perhaps it's actually the theme itself of the second movement. This is the opening of the gorgeous second movement of Schubert's Fifth Symphony. Listen to this. Here we go. Gorgeous melody, isn't it? Well, there's a Mozart violin sonata that was undoubtedly the inspiration of this, and that Schubert would have known. He was obsessed with Mozart's music, I think. This is Mozart Violin Sonata No. 25 in F major, the last movement. Take a listen. See if you can hear the resemblance. it's like Schubert took this piece, which might have been a favorite of his, and created a new melody out of it. He changed the meter, he changed the key, but he sort of connected the little dots that Mozart writes in this little minuet and treated it as a beautiful slow movement. So throughout Schubert's Fifth Symphony, you have a young Schubert writing a piece that's sort of inspired by his hero, Mozart. And it's interesting that at the time that he wrote this, Beethoven was looming large in Vienna, where Schubert was living. And it's an interesting point that Schubert made a sort of homage to Mozart. And in a sense, based on some of his also diary and journal entries, was kind of a little bit done with Beethoven's inspiration. He loved Beethoven's Second Symphony, was inspired by it early on, but he was sort of turning away from some of the direction that Beethoven was going at this time and really embracing Mozart. And because so much of his music was these beautiful art songs, there's this natural gift for melody. And the melodies in this Schubert's Fifth Symphony are just so glorious. There's so many beautiful melodies. What he does is he takes glorious melodies and he, inspired by Mozart, creates this kind of Mozart homage that is still super Schubertian. And one of the ways it's also very Schubert-like is the harmonic daring. He takes us into very unusual harmonic realms, and you don't even have to be a trained musician to feel it or hear it. Like, for instance, if we go back to the slow movement of the Fifth Symphony, if I fast forward a little bit, this is in a sort of home key of E flat. It's going to go on here for a little bit. I'm just going to fast forward and you'll hear that it takes us into an unknown realm here shortly. Okay, it's coming up. Beautiful melody, just singing and glorious. It's calm. Now listen. It's like we're in a suddenly a very unusual kind of change of mood and a change of feeling. And this is an unusual key that Schubert chose of C flat major. And then he'll go to C flat minor after this shortly, spelled as B minor in the score for those of you musicians watching, right here. This is just one example of so many examples of his harmonic daring that he goes to unusual places in this symphony. I'll play you a little bit of the last movement. I think I've played examples from the first three now. The last movement is a wonderful one. They're all great. All these movements are just full of wonderful melodies, and the outer movements have such fantastic energy. One of the things I love about this symphony also is the way it starts. When I played you that very first example, there's just a few seconds of like a curtain riser, And then it gets right into that melody. And then amazingly, he uses that few seconds of curtain riser as the actual material of the development, like as if it's like the real theme. Here it is again. Listen to the little curtain riser opening in the woodwinds. It's like you're stretching and waking up. There it is, right into the theme. No grand introduction that you might expect from a big symphony like this. In a way, the lack of a large, slow introduction before in the opening of the first movement, which would be normal in a first movement of a symphony, it sort of points the way that this is going to be a different kind of symphony. It is going to have a maybe more classical or even Haydn-esque kind of feel to it. The instrumentation being smaller and without trumpets, drums, or clarinets also points to a kind of purposeful stylistic attempt to go back in time on Schubert's, on Schubert's part. He was trying to go back to the classical era in a sense with this, but kind of put himself in that time. So it's a fascinating glimpse of young, masterful Schubert. This is not necessarily an early piece for Schubert, even though he was only 19 when he wrote it. Because the year before, in 1815, was sometimes called the Annum Mirabilis, the miraculous year, because in that year he wrote over 200 art songs. I think the first 3 of his symphonies, numerous chamber pieces, and these are all mature works, not like youthful pieces that aren't quite developed. No. So even in his 5th symphony, he's already developed his masterful voice. And it's fascinating that having done so, he goes back in time to an earlier era and tries out a sort of different set of clothing, if you will. What would it be like if he lived in Mozart's time? It's almost like that was what he was trying to challenge himself when he wrote this symphony. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Thank you very much.